Hello everyone and welcome back to another video from everyone's favorite Halo YouTuber, and this is Halo Infinite, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is a pseudo review of Halo Infinite based on the first weekend of Halo Infinite technical previews, where we played 3 maps against bots of various difficulties: Recruit, ODST, and Spartan. 343 also sprinkled in around 2 hours of PvP matchmaking, where we got a little taste of what it'll be like to play against actual humans in Halo Infinite. We also had the opportunity to play in the Academy, which offered various weapon drills for a variety of weapons where you could essentially test out each weapon against AI bots without the threat of returning fire. Obviously, this is a technical preview of a pre-release build of Halo Infinite. A lot can change and a lot will change before release, such as weapon tuning and balancing, but the big picture of the game will likely remain the same, or at least not change too much. This video will be broken down in 3 sections. First, the good, which are the things I like about Halo Infinite. Next will be the bad, which are things that I would like to see changed, but are tolerable or easily fixable. And finally, we will finish up with the ugly, which are things that I absolutely hate and could potentially be a huge issue down the road. So let's start off with the first bullet point I have under the good, and that is the equipment balance. I felt like the equipment was generally in a pretty good spot. When it was first shown that Halo Infinite would feature a grapple hook, or the grapple shot as it's called in this game, I was nervous that everyone would be going Apex Legends and flying around the map constantly like a bunch of cracked out Pathfinders. Luckily, the grapple shot has one spawn location on the map and can only be used 3 times once it's picked up. There's also a short cooldown after each use, so you can't spam 3 grapple shots back to back. After 3 uses, it's gone and you need to grab it off spawn again. We had very limited playtime against actual players, and the bots were so bad that they never even got close to using a grapple shot. But 3 uses for the pickup gives the grapple shot a much more niche use case. Sure, it can lead to some cheese when combined with a gravity hammer, or provides a quick getaway that can be frustrating, but it has to be used sparingly, and I find that to be a nice middle ground. We also saw the sensor dart, which only has 2 uses per pickup and has a pulse effect when active. It isn't a constant orb that reveals where players are the entire time they're within its range. It pulses every few seconds or so and reveals enemies within its range during the pulse. And finally, we saw the drop shield. The drop shield allows you to shoot through it at enemies, but defends bullets coming back at you from the other side. This had potential to be overpowered, however each block can get shot through with only a few shots, and you can actually shoot the bottom of the drop shield, which will destroy the equipment completely. I honestly didn't even find the drop shield very useful. It had a really long deployment time, where in most cases I would try throwing it down at the first hint of danger and would tend to die before the shield even got deployed. It seems to be best used as a defense fortification type of equipment, and it's not really a lifesaver in the same way you might use the Halo 3 bubble shield. Moving on to number 2 on my list for the good was low aim assist, which also inevitably leads to better balance with mouse and keyboard versus controllers. This was a huge sticking point in MCCPC, with controllers having a pretty distinct advantage over mouse and keyboard. So it seems like 343 is really toning down aim assist in order to not isolate PC players in their new free-to-play game. The low aim assist also raises the skill ceiling just a tad by making players really focus on their shots. Sure, this might outright turn me into a bad player, but I really think making aiming more difficult will separate the good and bad players. I guess I'm really just gonna have to hone my skills in the Academy. And speaking of the Academy, that brings me to number 3 on the list. I had so much fun messing around in the Academy, trying out all the weapons, going against my friends to see who can get the highest scores, and just having a low stakes environment to shoot around. I do have a couple gripes with the Academy, such as the bots only strafing slowly left to right, which is not how human enemies are going to play in matchmaking. I would have liked to see the enemies jump or throw in a crouch strafe, but overall the Academy was an awesome spot for new players to try out all the weapons, and it offered a fun minigame to compete with friends. Number 4 on the good list is that the game is just visually appealing, well, at least in my opinion. It seems like 343 took a page out of Treyarch's book and went for more vibrant colors. I feel like this is in line with other free-to-play games as well, such as Apex Legends and, as much as everyone wants to admit it, Fortnite. The brighter color palette just makes the game more lively, and it's a huge plus in a game that you may be playing for hundreds of hours. It can feel boring when constantly staring at dull colors. I mean, just think about Halo Reach. Number 5, and the final on the list for the good section, is the movement. Something I've seen all over Twitter is that Halo Infinite has finally figured out how to successfully modernize Halo. And I would say that I somewhat agree. The sprint is in, but it's not much faster than just normally walking. The sprint is very slow. You can also slide out a sprint, but it doesn't seem to really give you any sort of speed boost. It seems to be a way of just throwing your opponents off when challenging around the corner. The only advanced movement I've really seen so far has been using the slide down a slope to get a short speed boost. You can check out Shyway's channel if you want to learn about Halo Infinite slides, but overall it seems like you need to take some specific routes to utilize these techniques, and they're not nearly as easy to exploit as in Halo 5. Although who knows what the community will find after a full release. However, the movement is going to lead me right into the bad section, with number 1 on my list for the bad also being the movement. And before you go hitting that dislike button, just hear me out really quick, alright? Sprint is very muted in this game, which seems to be the best mix between the sprint versus no sprint crowd. But I kind of feel like this is one of the things where they tried to please everyone and ended up pleasing no one. I would argue that for players that like to fly around the map like they're Shotzzy are gonna feel like Halo Infinite is incredibly slow paced. I think that the sprint caters closer towards the players on the no sprint boat. But at the same time, if sprint is only marginally faster than normal walking speed, it just makes me feel like why bother putting it into the game at all? It's like 343 added sprint so that new players don't hop in like, where's the sprint button, but classic Halo fans don't feel like they need to snort a line of G Fuel in order to play ranked matchmaking. While I think they found a good balance, it kind of feels like sprint is almost useless for the most part. Maybe there's a thrust ability we haven't seen yet that can be combined with the sprint and the slide, and maybe it'll make it more useful, but we'll have to wait and see. Number 2 on my list for the bad is the footstep audio. I don't know if I'm hard of hearing, but there were tons of times where I'd end up getting snuck up on and just didn't really get an audio cue that an enemy is really close by. And before you go on saying I have zero awareness and I need to get good, don't forget that the motion sensor, or radar as most people call it, changed where it only shows enemies that are sprinting or shooting. So walking enemies are no longer on your radar. If you aren't going to show up on radar when walking at full speed, then I feel like I should at least be able to hear enemies when walking at full speed. In every other Halo game, you had to crouch walk to avoid showing up on the radar. Which makes sense because you're moving at extremely slow speed and trying to traverse the map while crouching. I would like to see either louder footsteps or revert the radar to showing players that are just walking. This leads me right into number 3 on the list for the bad, which is the radar. We have no explanation as to why it was changed, but I have a feeling it was in order to have the same settings in casual matches and the HCS professional settings, or at least they're trying to keep them as similar as possible. They tried this for the first 2 years in Halo 5. The HCS settings featured automatic weapon starts and full radar motion sensor, despite the pro scene voicing their opinions and asking for change. After 2 years, 343 finally removed automatic weapons and changed the radar to only show players that were sprinting, thrusting, or shooting. 6 years later, and it seems like they're trying to have the casual players play with the HCS radar. I know that there's probably a team at 343 looking at statistics and charts of how most popular esports and games have the same settings for both casual and competitive. But Halo has never really worked when they tried going that route. I personally just don't understand the big deal with separating casual from HCS settings in order to create the most competitive environment for professional play, but I guess that's why I'm just a failing YouTuber. Next on the list for the bad is that on PC, settings reset every single time I relaunch the game. This was incredibly frustrating when you could get locked into a loading screen and had to kill the game only to find out that all 17 of your custom keybinds had to be re-entered. Luckily, I'm a controller noob, so I only had a handful of changes, but it was still frustrating. I wouldn't put too much thought into this considering this is a pre-release build, and I'm sure it'll be fixed before launch, but I figured I'd mention it. There was also an audio glitch when joining Game in Progress where you wouldn't get the full game sound, but again, I assume that will be fixed before launch. Next up on the list was that I really just didn't like standard starts, which was the AR and sidekick, as well as just the overall weapon balance. I would have really liked to try Precision Slayer. The assault rifle and other automatic weapons don't have D-scope, so if someone is zoomed in at you, they will remain zoomed in and there's nothing you can really do about it. Add that in with a headshot multiplier for the assault rifle and you have a really powerful automatic weapon that seems to melt you pretty quickly. I also dislike standard starts because one of my pet peeves is being forced to use a weapon outside of its effective range. I found myself trying to use the sidekick to cross-map people, which, let's just be honest, it's not its intended purpose. It is a close range weapon that standard starts forces you to use at medium to long range. Sure, there's rifles to pick up on the map, but there's only one on each side. And if your teammate is sitting at the spawn picking it up every time, and the bots are unable to kill him, it becomes a frustrating experience. I didn't feel like the weapon balance was too bad overall, but it definitely needs at least a little tuning. While aim assist feels very low in general, it seemed a little too good on the battle rifle. It seemed like the BR aim was super sticky compared to the other weapons. I'd like to kind of see that tuned down a bit just to maybe be closer to the VK Commando. That gun seemed pretty difficult to consistently hit headshots. It had a lot of recoil that you had to manage, but overall I think it had significantly less aim assist than the battle rifle. Next up for the bad is the melee combat. I had a rough time with melee combat, as you can see in this clip of me getting ninja'd by a bot. I mostly noticed my frustrations with the melees during the PvP games. The lunge range seems pretty significant, and the cooldown is incredibly fast. Add that to the poor footsteps sound and players not showing up on radar unless they're sprinting, and it felt like I would turn a corner and just get double beat down. My first instinct is always to shoot and get a melee, but the double melee just seemed to be a much better option. It reminds me of the beginning of Halo Reach when players would use sprint and just swoop in, double beat you down. Luckily that was patched pretty quickly. I would really like to see melee combat changed before final release in Halo Infinite. I have a few miscellaneous things on the bad list as well, such as camo not lasting very long. I didn't have a timer on the camo, but it seemed like by the time I got to the other side of the map, where the enemy team always seemed like they were, my camo was already out. Clamber also looks and kind of just feels clunky. I don't think there's anything wrong with it per se, but the animation kind of just looks stiff. I would like to see a hold to clamber setting as well. I had to resort to using auto clamber. The HUD feels a little cluttered, like they're trying to put way too much information in too small a space. My boy Danny GG said it the best. Seeing which grenade you have is difficult, because there's a little sliver indicating that you have secondary grenades, but it doesn't tell you which type of secondary grenades. So I usually ended up just using what was already selected. There was no Spartan tag or indicator of teammates, all you had was just a little dot. This resulted in not being able to tell who's who on your team, which is frustrating when you want to tell a specific player to turn around or to pick up a weapon off your body when you died. You also can't move your death cam, which was annoying. I think the last time you couldn't move your death cam was back in Halo 2, so hopefully they add that feature in. And to round out the bad section of this video is going to be the sniper rifle. The sniper felt almost useless when zoomed in. When I first picked it up, it was basically detrimental to my team. I couldn't hit anything. I like the idea of making the sniper harder to use, but making it too hard renders it useless to most players. And it's just less fun when you can't use the sniper. I did mess with my ADS sensitivity and I seem to be doing a little better, but the sniper just feels a little wonky. I did a lot of sniper practice in the academy and felt like I was doing exceptionally well. I got up to like 48,000 score, which I thought was pretty good, but in the game I really struggled to hit my shots. This could be caused by the fact that there's no verticality to sniping in the academy, and it gave me just a false sense of skill since I only had to adjust left to right, but I really feel like the aiming was smoother in the academy than in matchmaking. And this leads me right into the ugly section. This is my personal worst of the worst, the things that I believe need to be addressed before launch and things that could result in doom and gloom for Halo Infinite. It's almost as if there is, dare I say it, heavy aim. I'm all for aim being hard for everyone, but I would be really upset if Halo Infinite turns out to be like Halo 5, where the aiming changes from server to server. Some games feel like aiming is buttery smooth, and other games feel like your aim assist is literally turned off. This absolutely needs to be sorted out prior to launch of Halo Infinite. Heavy aim is the ultimate boogeyman in Halo 5, and I personally believe Halo Infinite cannot survive if we have to deal with heavy aim again. Next up in the ugly section is going to be the performance issues. And before you go off on how this is just a pre-release technical preview of a months-old build, I hope you realize that I do know that. But with that being said, playing on the Xbox Series X, I still had a significant amount of frame drops and stuttering. While this is a pre-release build, the game was supposed to release 9 months ago. This isn't a 9-month-old build of the game, and I get chills thinking about what state the game would have been in if it released in fall 2020. Playing on PC, I still had the same frame rate and stuttering issues. I was getting 100 to 120 frames per second, but even then the game still didn't feel smooth. Oddly enough, the Academy ran buttery smooth on PC. Not so much on Xbox though. I don't know if it's because the Academy was run locally and the way the game runs alongside the matchmaking servers hinders the performance drastically, but it's frustrating having an awesome experience in the Academy and then having stuttering issues in matchmaking. 343 needs to make sure the performance is buttery smooth come launch day. I also noticed that even through the stuttering and FPS drops, aiming still felt easier on PC with a controller than on the Series X. I'm sure this is just because of the better hardware, but it is important to note that I believe you will be at a disadvantage playing on anything but a decent gaming PC. This is frustrating to me personally because my PC can run games really well, but it struggles to stream endgame at the same time. So I feel like I'm gonna need a streaming PC just to have the best experience possible while also still creating content. Next up on the ugly section is going to be friend vs foe. I know 343 is really happy about this feature so that players can see their awesome armor coatings, but I think it needs a significant revision. I don't know if I'm just old, but I found it very difficult to tell what health enemies are at, whether they're at full shield, versus being one shot, versus having the overshield. There is no lighting on the armor to signify that an enemy is one shot or a pop of the shield when an enemy's shield is completely drained. Or at least, it's incredibly hard to see with the friend vs foe system. In my opinion, this needs a significant overhaul in order to make enemy shielding more clear. I personally think the best thing 343 could do is to allow players to turn on a classic red vs blue system if they wish. I'm always an advocate for having more options, and giving players the option for a clearer, classic red vs blue setting that could be toggled on or off would be the best of both worlds in my opinion. Next on the ugly list is going to be the maps. This is pretty straightforward, but I just really didn't like the flow of the 3 maps we got to play. I haven't found myself in love with Halo's maps since back in Halo 3, and I feel like it's a big part of what the franchise has been missing. All 3 maps seem too big for 4v4, or at least competitive 4v4, which is my preferred playlist. Livefire had a sniper on it, but I didn't really find many angles to actually use the sniper. Recharge and Bazaar were very vertical and didn't seem to offer a good flow. I felt like I was just constantly clambering. Half the time I'm running across the map, and the enemy team will be dead by the time I get there. I was just unimpressed with the 3 maps we saw, and I'm hoping they have some better ones we just haven't seen yet. Although I will admit I really liked the way that Bazaar looks aesthetically. And to finish up the ugly list is going to be the medals. Medals seem to be a pretty small nitpick in the grand scheme of things, and I'm sure you're wondering how I could possibly put them on the ugly list. But do you remember the coolest medal you got during the technical preview? I don't think I even looked once after the match at my medals. First off, the medals are so small I had to whip out my telescope to see them on the screen. And on top of that, they just seem so dull. Everyone knows that awesome feeling you get when Jeff Steitzer is reading out your medals as you're getting an awesome multi-kill with appealing, vibrant colors flashing across your screen. It's that dopamine rush we're all chasing, and I just felt none of that. Maybe it was partly because we mostly played bots, so you could just run bottom middle and double nade for an overkill right off the start, but it just didn't do it for me. I need to feel it in my soul when I'm earning a medal. But that's going to be it for this video. That is the good, the bad, and the ugly in Halo Infinite, at least in my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed this comprehensive review of Halo Infinite. Like I said, this is after the first technical preview, so things are subject to change. But those are my thoughts so far. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video. Later.